Um, the naming of the guardrails came from watching bowling. I was flipping through the channels one day and I saw bowling on, and it reminded me that whenever I go bowling and whenever I go bowling with my kids, we bowl very differently. My kids push the ball. It doesn't matter how many times it bounces on the sides. All that they care about is it eventually hits the internal the internal pins. When I go bowling, I'm an awful bowler, but I don't use the railings. So I'll try and bowl. It'll go into the gutter, and all of a sudden, I don't get any points. No pin gets knocked down, and it'll be a big 0 on the scoreboard. Those railings is what really inspired me to talk about the guardrails, because when you're designing an ABA intervention, there are lines on either side that you have to stay between. Those lines are personal. I'm going to give you my guardrails, but this is just an exemplar for you to design your own guardrails. But those guardrails that you need to keep your intervention between, it's not as simple as just one time thinking about it and then staying within that the rest of the time. Rather, what happens is as your intervention changes and modifies, you go from one guardrail and bounce and have to redirect, and then you lean too far to the other side and have to bounce and redirect, and back and forth and back and forth. And that's what I really like about this metaphor. When you think about ethics, too often we think of it as a checklist. I did 1, 2, 3, 4, therefore I'm good ethically. I did my piece, I checked the boxes, I made sure that there's no XYZ. But in our interventions and caregiver trainings and all of the things we work with our staff are constantly back and forth and back and forth. And so you need to constantly reassess, are your ethical guardrails still in place, and is your intervention still between them? Knocking down the bowling pins aren't enough. It's not just about getting the job done. It's getting the job done while staying within your guardrails. Which means the guardrails are values. They are not procedures. These are to be applied flexibly to or on top of different procedures in an independent and individualized way. Also, these are not the end of the conversation, but just the beginning. These are your guidelines to know what you should think about when applying the intervention, and that's when cultural competency and other components such as more advanced trauma-informed care comes in at the same time. The key is to, like I said, continue checking those created interventions and guardrails. This says throughout the course, but throughout the intervention, right? For me, this was at least an every 1 month thing where I worked through all of my protocols and I looked to see, this intervention is tilted too close here, I need to watch out. This intervention has bounced off this guardrail, or more likely just completely sailed over it, I need to fix it. The more often you check your guardrails, the easier your staff will be able to respond to them, and the more consistent your intervention will be. Things that can throw guardrails off course are anything from treatment fidelity errors, a staff member not applying the intervention as expected, to you trying something new one day and then sticking to it without thinking about the long-term effects, which we'll continue talking about. We change so many things as behavior analysts during our interventions. You have to have some type of routine for consistently checking on the things important. IOA, fidelity, guardrails. Now, let's start talking about my 3 ethical guardrails. The first one is cause no further harm. To me, what this means is that we are acknowledging past harm and potential trauma by you or others in our field. We're listening and modifying our behavior and our intervention based on the client's behavior, not just the client's outcomes, if their data is going in the right direction, but the entire client. We'll talk about that in a second. And then seeking to understand the effects of the intervention past the target behavior, what I think of as second and third order behavior effects. So what do I mean by a couple of these points? Because we'll hit this one in a second. Well, listening and modifying based on the client's behavior. Now that we have the beautiful advent of electronic data collections, it's very easy as BCBAs for us to sit back and watch the data roll in. we're working on a manding target, and we see in our little graph that manding is going up, and we say, yep, that goal is doing great. But you would feel very differently about the success of that intervention if you knew that every single mand was one for cookie and there was no generalization, no variability, or if every single one of those mands was extremely contrived with a lot of prompting or a lot of other components there, right? So the difference in the actual context of that graph, as well as the interaction of the graphs and the other behavior around it, is what we're considering here. Another, a very potent example that happened to me was when I was early in my career working on potty training. I had a little 4-year-old, and he kind of had your classic early intervention stack of programs, like your classic language goals, your classic transitioning goals, pretty typical challenging behavior, no self-injury. But we were working with this client, and his big goal was potty training. So we stepped into potty training. I believe at that time we were doing timed sits on a fixed schedule. This was the Azrin style potty training. I typically use different methods now. I do more treatment packages, but at that point we were doing that style of potty training. We were getting some good results. The client was transitioning back and forth. We were getting P's. Everything was going the way we wanted it to. And I'd considered this goal to be a massive success. Then I stepped into parent training one day, and the caregiver was like, oh my gosh, what is going on at ABA? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we're working on our goals, we're doing our potty training. Isn't it going great at home? And she was like, he doesn't like coming anymore. He used to jump out of the car, used to run to you. He seems extremely upset. He doesn't want to come in. He doesn't seem to be talking as much. Is there something going on that I don't know about? And of course, I told her about the potty training, and by working through this, we realized that while potty training was going great, we had taken away a lot of the reinforcers that were naturally occurring to make ABA something he actually wanted to go to. That error that I made there was that I was looking at a singular data point for a singular intervention. This is what we're trained to do. This is what we see in research all the time. The research question is X. The graph talks about X, and then the discussion is about X. Whereas clinicians, what really happens is the goal is X, all of the data is A through Z, and all of the results are A through Z as well. So when I'm talking about expanding based on other aspects of the client's behavior, the second and third order behavior effects, that's what I mean. I also want to come back to this point. There's a difference between compassionate intent and a compassionate behavior. When I talk about causing no further harm or acknowledging past and potential trauma by you and others, oftentimes one of the responses to that is, well, I didn't mean to cause harm. I just didn't know any better. And I felt that, I still feel that I didn't mean to cause any harm in the past with my interventions. But the reality is that regardless of intent, there was harm being provided, right? There was harm that was happening. And so my main point here is that there's a difference. It's good to have the intent of being compassionate, but what ultimately matters is the learner's reaction to that behavior. And so a compassionate behavior, regardless of intent, is compassionate. So if any of you, like me, struggle with the idea that all the work we've done in the past, some of it may have caused harm, I would encourage you to feel it, let a bit of it go, but also know that in the future, compassionate behaviors are what the field needs, not just compassionate intent. I think it's pretty hard to be in this field without compassionate intent. The next guardrail, continuously informed and assented to. So this comes from consent and assent. Consent is your typical informed consent from a pediatrician before they give your child a vaccine, right? These are the risks, these are the benefits, this is the XYZ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Explaining demonstrating and talking to both the client and the caregiver as you're working through a behavioral intervention is crucial, not just at the very beginning, like we see in the hospital setting, but continuously. Once again, think about that bowling ball bouncing back and forth and back and forth. Our interventions change frequently when we're doing our 5-5 codes. That means that each time interventions change, there should be informed consent being provided again. That doesn't mean that we have to re-sign a piece of paper every single time we make a small change, but that does mean that there has to be continuous information being fed to all parties so that they can at any time make an informed decision whether or not to continue. The other side of the equation is, of course, assent. Assent is, generally speaking, we'll talk about this more later, behavior that moves towards something or behavior that moves away from something being non-assent. A big learning point for me in this was we sometimes have clients for 5 hours, 6 hours. I've had a client for 8-hour sessions before. Then I would go home and I would talk to my 5-year-old. And that 5-year-old changed his mind and changed what he wanted to do 30 times in 30 minutes. And it was a duh moment for me because I realized that, of course, our learners are going to be willing to assent to something, one thing at 8 a.m. and something totally different at 5 p.m. Or 8:30 or 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock. So this idea of continuously assenting and measuring and tracking that continuous assent means that at all points, we know that we have a current behavior of assent, meaning that we're good to keep going and respect the client's dignity. We're not going to have the whole conversation on assent and the conversation around when each component goes in and what happens with things that need to happen. That's a different CEU. And there are some good stuff in the classroom about assent that we've talked about and other folks have talked about. So I encourage checking it out. But just in general, tracking, measuring, and moving forward only if we have assent is what we're looking for. And that's really what this guardrail zooms in on. And finally, the third guardrail is very important to me. It is, to me, the primary skill acquisition guardrail that I have to think about. Cause no further harm is typically perpetrated more in the challenging behavior, in the behavior reduction. Continuously informed and incented to, it's typically more in the behavior reduction. Building resistant repertoires, to me, is firmly in the skill acquisition. Now, the lines are blurred, response classes and all that good stuff, increasing skills to decrease behaviors. But building resistant repertoires means approaching challenges constructionally and building on current skills and adding new ones versus just focusing on whacking the behavior down with a hammer. Right? Whether that hammer be NCR or extinction, teaching replacement skills that are not just functional to reduce the behavior, but functional and fit in to the overall picture. This, and we'll talk about this in a second, is based in the constructional approach. And it's when we're taking into account all outcomes of changes to a behavior and planning for and designing generalization and discharge plans from the onset.